Thank you all. If there are any deep burning questions, I'm going to ask questions of both the panelists and the users, but in the meantime, any big deep burning questions on each of the three presentations at all? It has to be in a wrap, though, just so you know. No. Yes? No. Go ahead. Yes.
So the first speaker ran a lot of wireless instrumentation, and I see the value. But what did it do to your maintenance? Do you have to increase your maintenance staff, increase numbers? Because you're now considering some of these wireless instruments to be important because they're driving your particular analytics of what's going to happen. So just what did you do to your maintenance staff? Did you have to increase it or not, or how did you manage that?
We have not taken any specific actions that I'm aware of to increase staff. We believe these are the ease at which we're able to deploy them, the cost at which you can replace them. That at this point, I haven't seen us take any steps to increase staff. Probably if we've done anything, we've applied a little pressure to the I&E group, and they're probably a little more connected to it. We've taken some work from an OT perspective back to the corporate office. From an ITO to try to combine some ITOT, is that freed up some I&E techs so they can go better manage our sensors as well. Those are kind of the two steps we took, I would say.
All right, well, if you have any other questions, we're going to circle back around. Kevin, I'm sure, I mean, we've had conversations before, see a lot of Infor people on these journeys. What's kind of your observations over the changes over the last 1, 2, 3 years along this digital transformation journey? And as I know you also have, in many ways, people are asking for more functional capabilities over and beyond typical EAM. Any comments on that?
What we heard today was, from the EAM perspective, not the traditional model of EAM. So not just work orders, not just maintenance, but at the same time, it's not just condition-based maintenance either. It's a consolidation. Gentleman showed last from Deep Sea is a perfect example of a lot of that. He's overlaying a lot of that data and making sense of it all. So there's a lot of folks that we haven't done this since 1986 that have had systems for a long time and always ask the question, what can I do different? How can I handle it now? So seeing a lot more modeling going through. Scott talked about how he's seeing the pumps that they have run at 60 months, and they're supposed to run at 100. Why? And how do you do that? How do you make that decision? How do you get the data to make 100% sure that you're utilizing it? It could just be because your application. It could be because where it is. It could be because how it's deployed. You don't fully know. So gathering a lot of the data of history with overlaid to the original equipment manufacturer expectation and the design expectation is where we're seeing a lot of people at least want to go in their own practice in one fell swoop. So modeling the future based on history is something I always wanted to get to, but the data's there, just as he was mentioning earlier. It's just modeling it correctly to make better decisions. That's a theme we see everywhere.
Jacqueline, how about you? Has your when you first were working with Michael and others, what's been your observation of the changes, kind of in general the journey, but also what you're seeing as far as expectations when you speak to prospects or customers?
Yeah. So Michael's done quite a few presentations. He's very passionate, has a strong message. What I like about this case study or this user is how fast they've moved. They have started, like he said, with the spreadsheets and the paper, and they've really built their twin and started getting quick time to value by bringing in the SEEK and the OSI and the SDX operations all together. We don't always see that. Some people don't know what they want to manage. They don't know how to get started. So they have a solution, but they really haven't looked through their people and processes to really adopt it and get that quick time to value. So I think that's a great success story that we can all learn from.
Great, thank you. Adam, what are you, what are you hearing from your prospects and customers? Or what are you guiding them toward discussing over the next 2 or 3 years, what they ought to be doing?
Yeah, I think with ours that we're running into with the Accruent, what Aaron talked about in the mobility aspect, right, is huge. We're still dealing, we're seeing a lot of traditional, say, manufacturing organizations who you may be in the same situation where you're just trying to find a way out of Excel spreadsheets, out of writing notes, sending paper airplanes, anything that is that native knowledge, right? We're seeing a huge gap between the digitization of maintenance and asset management, and then the incoming new workforce, as well as the retiring native workforce. So what Aaron's been doing with MC Express, our mobile product, has been really what a lot of people are going to. They want real-time access to that, capture the data, but then also review it. We're thinking about asset history going all the way back to the beginning of install of, say, a pump is absolutely vital. Also, Aaron showed it off a little bit, the connectivity, and really not necessarily a EAM product being the sole provider of all these different best of needs, but rather being okay with using, say, APIs to connect to other things such as HRIS systems or pump filtration monitors to pull in that information to give you at least a hub that shows you everything. Then you can make data-based insights and decisions. And ideally at that point, not predictive, but so much more is automate your processes, right? You saw that at the beginning entry slide, right? So that's a big focus, I'd say probably not immediately now, within the next 5 years.
Right. Peter, I know we're talking about different subjects, data management, we've mentioned SQL, I know in some cases maybe visual analytics and in other areas that are exciting. Where are we heading from your perspective, or what are you seeing in the markets as far as AI and ML, and specifically ML, and how that can tie toward high-powered asset management, and what are you seeing that would be reasonable over the next 2 or 3 years, and how to get people to be to know what to ask for in their budgets in the next couple of years?
So I think what I've seen in the market across our customer base and others has been a jump into the deep end type of approach with AI, machine learning, and the like, and wanting to get the full power, get the full ability out of those tools, without having first built out an analytics-based culture that can that's fully actualized and can take advantage of them. And so I think the most successful ones are going into that process, eyes wide open, understanding what they're going to need to do, not just from the technology side, but on the people side, to get the most value out of that. There's nothing worse than throwing something out there, not having it worked. You've lost credibility and you've probably lost traction at the same time. So I think investing across that analytic spectrum is going to be key for then taking those more advanced analytics approaches, machine learning, AI, and having them transform a company when it comes to maintenance.
Great, thank you. I have many questions, although this isn't about me. So in the meantime, any questions for the panel and for the users in the meantime? Although we'll have some at the end as well, but are there any burning questions now? Okay, we'll go on. So Aaron, we've done quite a few studies, and we have a lot of discussions in our research about trying to make information easier to use. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you one. No, but the kind of like a democratization of data and democratization of analytics and whatnot. I know you spoke about SQL and others. For those who don't know select statements and others, or don't care to know, any suggestions as far as whether to get people interested in maybe easy to use visual analytics, or what your thoughts are on that, but how to get the floor worker, the actual end user interested in, and also educated as to how to use what they're doing, or maybe they're already on that journey, but any observations from that perspective?
Yeah, something we learned about is just having accurate information is number one. And in my department, I developed an acronym for it. It's as simple as AEIOU. It's accurate, easy to understand information to organize and utilize throughout water reclamation. And so that's something I put on my wall when I came up with it. And it kind of encompasses all the things about having that accurate data, making it easy for them to understand. That comes out to like naming conventions and things. If the guy out in the field calls it the blue building, great, we'll call it the blue building. I'm okay with that, you know. And but still having that unique identifier that we know as it is. And so when you start to standardize your information, you start to standardize your naming conventions and across treatment plants and across the users in the field, there becomes a common knowledge in the culture about how we have our data structured. And from that, it's easier for them to draw conclusions from reports and things like that.
So how did you get your background? Is it interest? Is it studying or?
For SQL, you mean?
Oh, well,
Or
just in
for-
general.
In general.
The kind of convergence of asset management and data, it seems like it's
Sure.
clicking.
Yeah, it was. I went to UCF for business information systems, and it was kind of a hybrid of business and data and websites and databases and things like that. And so, connecting the business world or the people that do the work to the data that we can get from our information systems is definitely kind of my playground for sure.
Great. Scott, we, in many ways, so it's great that you shared this journey, and it was great. Kind of, where do you see the department or the organization in 2 to 3 years? What are you prepping management for, upper management, or even subordinates? But in general, how are you prepping them where they should be, where you all collectively should be in a few years, and what's kind of the type of things that you would recommend people budgeting to be able to get there over the next few years in their organizations?
So, I think the last one's kind of a trick question.
Well, it wasn't meant to be.
But where I see us is getting us organizationally to a point where we go from, we just know we change the tires every 50,000 miles to, we really understand the tread condition we're working under. We trust the data. We don't have to physically go out and touch the asset to go, yeah, we should go work on it. But it's getting our entire organization from operator to maintenance tech to reliability engineer and everybody in between to trust the data and to understand that we have all kinds of data that make it trustworthy. We have conditions, we have history, we have all the things that we need to better connect to the status of our assets, and we run the assets in the way we want to, under our control. From a budgeting perspective, I don't see a big change. We're clearly going to invest in the technology, the wireless sensors, the things. It's hard. We're going to go spend money to get monitoring capability where we don't have it today and where the old wired system just doesn't work. I think the bigger conversation we're trying to have with management is that the operator of the future will be less the traditional guy who goes out and gathers a bunch of data, and it'll be more tech savvy. They'll be more connected to mobile solutions, and they'll be more of a frontline maintenance technician capability, and that those maintenance techs will be working more remotely. They'll be more of a subject matter expert. Well, they will be providing guidance into the field, and so the guys who can still want to be in the field can be there, but we're going to change the roles and responsibilities over time. I think that's probably what we're trying to talk to management about most, is you're going to have to change. The worker of the future is going to be much different, and they're going to have a lot fewer people in the plants. To your point earlier, they're dangerous places to be, and we're going to have more expertise remote to the sites.
Great. Michael, it's impressive the velocity that you've, the information that you can get now and the swiftness in which things have changed. I know the issues that prompted were important, but clearly you have the organizations have the right information. Where do you see over the next 2 or 3 years, where does it have to go to be able to Is it, and in some ways, of course, real time, but also in some cases, new real time. In case, I don't think real time is, near real time is even fast enough, it sounds like, particularly in your case. But how do you be able to, how are you able to, or are you able to yet get the predictive element? And I know we're way before prescriptive maintenance, but maybe predictive maintenance or predictive inspections, and just thoughts of where we all should think about where we may want to go over the next few years.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is, especially as I mentioned, for us, I like to say we're seeing things now that we've never seen before. So in oil and gas, it was always HMI screens that were, digital, and then you had analog gauges. And so for me to send off a report to say, here's your 1 minute pressure loss, kind of throws everybody out of whack because it's hard for them to contextualize what it is you're actually telling them. So I think it's going to take a shift, especially from our industry. It's going to take a shift for people to understand that, hey, look, what I'm showing you is a leak. You can't see it as a leak. It is starting to leak. And so from a predictive standpoint, people will say, well, we can predict when something's going to fail. And I'll turn around and say, well, no, you can't, because you wouldn't have deployed the blow-up preventer if you thought it was going to fail next week. But as it's starting to fail, there's enough indicators that you're starting to see the first sign of something not going right. And it's getting the buy-in from generations of technical support people who have always said, hey, look, it leaks when I see fluid coming out of the other side, then I know it's leaking. But you're just building the business case. And I think we're starting to see that shift more and more. But we've actually had the OEMs reach out to us and say, hey, could you help us? Because you're seeing things that we aren't allowed to see. Because one thing in oil and gas is there's a big fight over data. Whose data is it? Is it the oil company's data because it's drilling a well? Is it the drilling contractor's data because it's the asset owner? Is it, and so nobody wants to share this information. And so I think what's starting to happen is the more people are understanding what actually is taking place and finding that number, because our industry, just real quick, and I apologize.
No.
The OEM has always dictated the maintenance, and the US regulator said you will follow the OEM. So the person who's making money is the person who's dictating the maintenance. And so now as an industry, we're trying to go back and say, okay, look, 100 cycles isn't where you need to be. You can push it out to 150. But until you can build that case to say it's safe because of a Macondo, because of the catastrophic nature of a failure, you're really having to make people believe and have a trust that no one's ever had before, that going from 100 to 150 is safe. And who wants to be that first person to push that boundary? And so we're starting to see it more and more. One of the drilling contractors had an arrangement with an OEM where they sold back their equipment to him and said, okay, you now own it and you maintain it. And immediately the preventive maintenance schedule shift because now the OEM's paying for it. And it was like, well, 1 year, it's 3 years now. And so we're seeing the change, but it's getting people to understand what it is you're actually looking at and then trusting that information is correct.
Jacqueline, can you comment on the partnership, not anything proprietary, but the idea of working with customers and others to look at the future roadmap? Any comments on, is that process changing, and if so, how it's going?
It definitely is. So we do a lot of our AI and machine learning out of our innovation hub. So we, and because different use cases on training and having lots of data to be able to train and very specific problems that you're solving, that's where we found it more beneficial than taking like a canned box solution to market, but to create those strong partnerships. One other thing that I think that we're gonna start seeing is the sharing of the data. You mentioned that I own this data, I own that data. But once people understand that the way that you do your asset structure and the properties that you're managing, like according to CFOS and things, there's no IP in that, right? You're going to start seeing people share more data so that maybe you have a data lake that you could go into and say, this pump, I have this pump in this condition. Well, this other asset owner operator had it in this condition also, and this is how they fixed it and what they've seen on the top failures so that you could learn from it and get better and better. So partnering with our innovation hub, but also the sharing of data is where I see the future coming to.
Great. Kevin, we've been talking about for years mobile work orders and actually digitizing paper. But it seems like we're at an inflection point, maybe a little bit, maybe a couple of years ago, but of using mobility for a whole wide range of things. And I'd love to get your thoughts and observations on where this is and where it's heading from your perspective.
So we have a rule of thumb in development that we extend to mobility especially. To her point, to everyone else's point, there's a lot of data to deal with, but it means nothing if you can't use it. So we try to make software so that a human can use it. And another thing that we found too is maintenance world especially, the rule of thumb is there's no more unnatural thing to witness than a maintenance technician that sits behind a computer. So maintenance technicians want to be in the field. They want to do maintenance technician stuff. And that's where they excel. He or she is really highly trained and skilled to get out there. But if he or she has to come back to a workstation to obtain detailed documents, like you were talking about earlier, structure levels of where to go, specifications that you have to adhere to, it just doesn't work. So the question is, that's a lot of data, but how do you get it to them in a way that's easy to use? So we spend an inordinate amount of time. We have a usability design team in Manhattan that is a company called, not a company, it's a department, it's called Hook and Loop. So if you're familiar with Velcro, there's a hook side and then there's a loop side. So the idea is to have the engineering with the beauty together in one. And when you have that, believe it or not, you'll hear stories of where a maintenance tech went home to his or her spouse and was like, "You can't believe the work order I did today. It was the coolest thing in the world. I was able to take a picture, I was able to document it, I was able to go through." So how do you get those experiences on a regular basis in mobile with all the data elements that are at your hands and making sense of it? We try to do it a lot based on the persona, the use case that you were talking about, what they see in a daily life, the culture of it all, of being able to, like you were talking about, Peter, to be able to understand the analytics and to have faith in what that data is. It's a pretty large task. But once you can reach that point, as you said, the tipping point, where people really start to grasp it, understand it, make sense of it, it's very powerful. And it's only can be built further from there. You can't really go backwards. So we, in mobility at least, is big for us because a good 80 to 90% of our customer base are in the field and not sitting behind a desk. So because of that, we spend a lot of time on it, and usability is probably the first thing we ever pay attention to.
So,
Please.
building on that, so the usability piece of it reminds me that an effective approach is making sure that you have a good data strategy in place, because you talked about the low-cost sensors and the availability of those. Well, before you unleash a data tsunami, you have to understand, I think the most effective companies are understanding, okay, what do we want to use it for? How do we want to make it available? Because as we've heard in all the examples, there's no shortage of data out there. It's how do you make the important stuff available, mobile form factors, et cetera? How do you organize it, so that they're joining, that when you go to the record, everything's right there, whether you're talking about a BOP or if you're, talking about the water system in Orlando. How do you bring all that together, make it easily accessible and usable so people can take action? Going into it blindly is not a good recipe for success. Understanding what problems am I trying to solve, what do I want to make available to people so they can make informed decisions, starting there and then working back to the data that feeds that is, I think, a key for success.
Good point, Peter. Thank you. Adam, what are the common themes of both prospects and customers from what you're hearing as far as needs over the next couple of 3 years?
Yeah, it's mobility. Obviously, we touched on that a lot. Everyone's got such amazing viewpoints of that, because that's what it is. What we're seeing, especially if we're talking about the digitalization of asset management, is that this is not something that's relegated to just a maintenance department anymore. This is inadvertently, we've seen over the last 2 years, this is now converging with other aspects of our organizations that we work with, specifically engineering, right? Engineering, I never thought about this until we ran into use cases, have very specific needs and wants to help maintain asset health, keep it up. They do that through what? Engineering documentation, right? Very specific controlled documents that need to have revision control and all this. We're seeing all of a sudden this kind of start to see a need for these two, although at first glance maybe separate departments of an organization, need to have the same kind of digital aspect, mobile work orders that not only show asset history, but then also show me my engineering documentation, the most recent version, albeit in the field, all in one shot, right? That's something that's become a big, big thing for us in the last year. Connected systems, right? I know we're thinking about, how does, we connect in and make sure that the information we're pulling in the field is coming from all the systems that have, again, real time or as close to real time information to really produce the right tools to do the job in the field from a technician's point of view. Other than that, really the intelligence or intelligently maintaining things, not just reactive, not just even preventive at this point, is something that's going to start being a big thing. And we've already started to see that trend.
I have one more question for the group, but also we have about maybe 10 minutes. I have other questions I can ask too, but as far as asking the panel, any burning questions right now before I ask my question? Or okay, my question, and keep up the thoughts of others. Interesting, one of the presentations today of the keynotes about that even with all the efforts we've been doing, especially in highly industrial companies, that the ability to predict failures is still, in some cases, they didn't use the point of proof of concept, but the idea is it's not as far along as we would think. Any observations from that perspective from any of you as far as why is that the case? And we all know it's a noble and important cause to keep on going, but it's just interesting, we're not as far as we would think we would, because we know it's complex and there's a lot of combination and permutation of different things going on. But the idea that we still have a long way to go. Any observations or thoughts?
I'll make a comment. And this goes back to what our president says a lot in his presentation. So he looks at investment and he sees that there's a ton of asset operators that want to invest in predictive maintenance or prescriptive maintenance. Mm-hmm. But then you look around and they haven't invested in any digital twin. And so it's kind of like, you're missing the fundamental part that's not near as sexy as what you're going to get with the value. But we really have to back up, and I think until you back up and do the fundamental steps that support that predictive, prescriptive type solution and strategy of your people and processes, I think you may still keep missing the buck.
I'd like to say too, I think that, we do have those sensors on, we have a blower system. There's probably 10 or 12 data points on these blowers about how they're running and clearances and all these things that are happening. And at the end of the day, the manufacturer doesn't want to own up to saying, oh, it's going to fail in 6 months. Like, they don't want to tell us that, And at the end of the day, too, we have maintenance guys who are just monthly people. They just like to have that work order on the first of the month, and they don't really have a drive to, what am I going to, we have people that come in that they work on a weekly work schedule, and sometimes there's 5 weeks in the month. And they come into my office and go, hey, my work orders didn't generate. And I'm like, hold on, there's 5 weeks this month. You find something else to do, And they don't want to. That's not their culture. So I think from both of those fronts, we're not seeing a real push toward doing the predictive maintenance rather. So.
Interesting, just an observation. Kevin and I had some of thought in previous discussion, and sometimes in the shop, and having come from the shop myself, going through school, is a lot of times the idea of technicians wanting to do something. You want to fix something. You want to repair it. You want to, the idea of not that you want it to fail, but the idea sometimes it's like, that's what I do. That's what I'm hardwired to do. I got to fix something. I've got to touch something. Any questions now for any other group of any topics at all?
Somebody's got to give us a question.
One question I have for the folks that are doing some predictive maintenance. If you take something out when it's not actually broken, take it out early, is there any way to do any verification? Do you get any feedback that your call was the right call, that, yep, that part was going to break soon? I can tell that it is deteriorated or anything like that, or you just, my data told me to change it, so I'm changing it, and then you go forward?
knew you wanted to talk.
So it's a good question, and for us being, non-asset owners, we see multiple philosophies across the industry. And unfortunately, I think the answer is no. And so what'll happen is they'll tear apart a component. It'll say reseal it, it's been a year, they'll tear it apart, and they take the seals, they throw them in the trash. And, a lot of research has been done on preventive and predictive maintenance to say, what is the purpose of that PM? Why are you doing it? And if your intent is to try to eliminate a failure from happening, well, then the next question is, how many times when you did this PM did you actually find that failure was starting to happen? And if the answer is no, 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 we've never seen it, well, then why do you do it? And one of the things that we see is a lot of the equipment that we work on is very heavy, it's very complex, and taking it apart, for these guys is multiple days to get these things off the blow-up preventers. They actually find the failure after they put it back together because they've cut a seal, they've rolled the seal, and it was like, why did you tear it apart? And they said, well, the preventive maintenance said to do it. And so for me, myself, and what we're trying to do is challenge an industry to say, why are you doing the PM in the first place? If the first thing you do is an operator test, you do a pressure test, why not do the pressure test first? And if it passes, then don't tear it apart. You've saved tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of a 5-year life cycle for a component just by doing a predictive test to find out, is there really something wrong with it? And unfortunately, again, for our industry, you're trying to change a mindset. You have to do, accumulator pre-charge every time you deploy the blow-up preventer. But the first thing you have to do is do a drawdown test to make sure that your pre-charge was good. How about we do the drawdown test, and if the number is the same as the last 10 times we had, we know that our pre-charge is good. But you're trying to shift looking at data and information. But no, I think a lot of times components are replaced, the old parts are thrown in the trash, and then we don't really learn from what was the status of that seal, where we had 90% life, 99% life? Was the durometer still the same as what it was when it went in? People have to invest in the front end, which is, I'm gonna take a spare seal, take this other seal, we're gonna send them both to a manufacturer and have them investigate, or have them, taking a look at from an elastomeric standpoint. But that means money, and companies don't wanna pay more money to do extra maintenance. They'd rather just say, well, that's the way it's been done for, since blow-up preventers were made, we'll just keep on doing it. So that's a good question though, because I think it happens across industries.
I'll add one additional thought to that, and that we talked about the people change piece. The reality is, my maintenance techs in the field, we've got to stop rewarding them for how fast they can fix it, and instead understand what they learn as they fix it. And that's why I said, I think you're going to see those kind of shift, and those guys, you'll see some people that have focused a little more in that space and the actual repair, but then somebody else will come along, a reliability engineer, who will help go troubleshoot those things. And until we can start to capture that piece of the data, to your point, you pull a shaft out of a pump, it's in the trash can, right? Nobody's gonna, oh, wow, that's clearly still within spec. Why did we get the anomaly? Why did we take action? But I think it's the people change piece that's really gonna be hard for us, because firefighters wanna fight fires, and maintenance guys wanna fix things, and those guys wanna fix this one and get to the next one.
I'd say one positive thing we had is that even if in those few cases we are doing predictive, you start to see an anomaly, you pull it, but it's a planned pull, right? It's not a failure that happened. We can actually plan for that. We can redirect flow. We can do whatever we need to do to avoid the overflow or the failure in the first place. But we were clued in by some predictive number, right? But that's been a positive thing in the sense that we prevent that unplanned downtime.
We have about 2 minutes. Question in the back?
I'll address this to Scott, but I would love to hear across the panel. From a budget standpoint, when it comes to digital transformation, where did the impetus, like, how did IT get involved? And were they allies in this, or were they maybe trying to take the lead? Was there any friction there?
There's always a little friction. But with that said, so we took the lead from understanding that foundationally there needed to be infrastructure that was going to make transformation work. And so whether it was our CFO, who has IT responsibilities rolling up through him, saying we're going to go invest in wireless infrastructure. Or if it's operations saying, we're going to go reorganize such that we have people who focus in each of these areas, which made it really easy for IT to come along and go, oh, okay, here's how I'm going to partner. I'm going to reorganize my programs so I match up with each operational capability. And then the other thing we did is we took a handful of people out of our IT department, and they're still in IT, but they came out of what I'll call run and maintain, to go specifically focus on those ideas, concepts, proofs that are more uncertain. And so we have the digital transformation team as a part of our IT organization that then partners with the business to go take some chances, and experiment some and see what we can do in a variety of spaces. So all of those things, I think, came back together, and it was having senior C-suite leadership saying we're going to go after this, and then knowing certain things infrastructure-wise had to be foundational to everything else we were going to do.
Oh, we do, okay, one more.
I have two questions. First is, Aaron, are you available to do other informational rap videos for?
I still dabble in that art, yes.
Okay, we'll connect after. My question is similar to what was asked before. We did the sort of poll earlier at the session. What would be your message to those of us maybe exploring or having limited use of some of these digital technologies within asset management, to ways to build momentum and get started and kind of get the buy-in?
Anyone?
So I would say start with defining well the problem you're trying to solve. And the problem usually has some type of financial impact, bottom line, final product quality, throughput, whatever the case may be. Start with that and then work backwards from there with, okay, what would I have done? What could I have done to see that coming to make sure that didn't happen?
Jacqueline, did you have something too?
I was just going to say another aspect. I mean, obviously, and we've heard it through everybody speaking today, it's about the data, but it's also the people and the processes. But start with what you have. Don't put too much emphasis on what everybody else's digital twin looks like, or what's the shiniest thing that costs the most, that takes the longest to get started. I mean, if you don't have a 3D model, start with P90s, and start connecting your things and using and grow your maturity with small steps over time.
I think
look-
from
oh,
what
go
I've
ahead.
seen,
No, go ahead.
I'll be quick.
No.
Make it a team sport. And I'm not saying go make a task force. It's going to take up 40 hours of everyone's life every week. But you bring along other key people, strategic people that are going to help to really evangelize the idea of transformation at a digital level. It's going to make your life a lot easier. And along with, taking stock of what you have, making it work, and then if you can't make it work, figure out how to make that happen strategically.
Well, thank you all, everyone, for your attention and interest, and what a great presentations.